So we have all the panel here of the next session, which is going to be the well thought of evidence-based medicine masterclass that we thought of having this time in our conference, where we are not looking forward only to a talk, but a discussion amongst experts in this field as to what they think about the management, what are their personal experiences, what is the clinical utility and the take-home message. So I welcome Dr. Benny ma'am, Dr. Mukherjee sir, Dr. Amit.
Hi.
Hello, how are you this morning?
Yeah, good, Anjali.
How are you, Anjali?
So I'm fine. How are you, Dr. Amit?
All well.
How are you, Mukherjee sir?
Hello, Achi.
We have a good teacher. We have the best teacher, Dr. JJM.
Yes, and on the fantastic day of Teachers Day.
Yeah, Teachers Day. So we have to salute him.
No, we have to salute all of us. All of us are teachers here. All of us are teachers. Where's
I would
Suresh?
salute specifically Benny madam because she's really been a teacher, and JJ sir also good morning.
Correct, yeah. Where's Suresh?
Yeah,
He's there
I'll
actually.
just ask the team to call him up.
Good morning, JJ.
Good morning,
luck.
sir.
morning, sir.
Morning.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
I'm there.
We have another
JJ.
5 minutes, sir.
I'm there, JJ.
There he is. So we can start actually, Anjali, if you
Hang
give
on,
us a
hang
go
on.
ahead.
I need another 1 or 2 minutes, JJ.
Hey, you are the last batch, so no problem. You can pad up slowly.
No problem. You can start. You start.
There
guys.
would be people who would be logging in at 10, sir. Would you want to wait for a few minutes? There are 3 to 5 minutes more to 10
If we are
o'clock.
so famous, so sought after program, and that people will join in at 10, we will certainly wait, man. It's our moment.
More people get benefit will be better. No?
Yeah, then we can wait and we can.
Anjali can cover a longer biodata of JJ and kill the time. There
No,
may
please
be
don't.
there may be slight learning on the achievement and the efforts put in by some of the senior consultants.
सर क्यों खींच रहे हो सर
In the
क्यों खींच
era
रहे हो
we-
बॉम्बे आ जाओ क्या
नहीं मैं आपके साथ हूँ ना और Benny is my batchmate, so we know we had been there for 40 years around.
Okay.
Absolutely,
Dr.
sir.
Benny doesn't
Don't
look
take
even
that
40.
opportunity.
Dr. Benny, Dr. Meena Chabra from Delhi.
Thank
Hi,
you,
Dr.
Meena.
JJ. Happy Teachers
Hi,
Day.
hi. Happens with all
Thank
of
you
us.
so
All of
much.
us, all of us.
And happy Teachers Day to all the teachers.
Yeah, all of you.
All of us actually.
Mutual
Can we have
learning from
Mukherjee
each
sir's
other.
slide?
Wait, no, we can start at 10. We
Okay,
have
sir.
we have a very sharp program.
Normally, Dr. JJ, we get messages that mother is your first teacher. Today, messages are your wife is your teacher.
ये तो मैं बहुत पहले सीख गया
And then your daughters. They teach a lot to the fathers. The daughters.
What have the sons done? Poor sons. Huh?
I swear.
Just
Poor sons.
एक minute.
Reverse gender bias. Questions?
I think we can start, Anjali.
We can
Right,
start. We can
right.
start.
Yeah.
So at outset, let me welcome the EBM lead, Dr. Mukherjee sir, and the experts in this wonderful panel, which is going to discuss a very important topic that we deal with day in and day out. And probably the guidelines, in spite of guidelines being there on such a topic, when it comes to clinical application of those guidelines, there are many steps at which we need to stop and think what exactly needs to be done with the patient of stage 1 and 3 CKD, not only in how to manage, but how to assess and how to exactly deal with such patients, how to monitor them, what to tell the patient as to whether the kidney is affected, how much, and as soon as the people hear the word that the kidney is affected, it's a big bomb on them, and we need to be in a very clear mind as to how to deal with this problem. So let me introduce the EBM lead, Dr. Mukherjee sir, who is all known to us as a senior consultant in medicine and
Anjali,
endocrine.
people have read it. So I can, if I can share my screen.
Sure. Over to you, sir. I would request you to take a moment to introduce your expert team and then go ahead with the topic.
Yes. If I can get the share
Yes.
Still don't have the share.
Vama team, can you share the slides of?
No, I want the share screen.
Right. Sir.
And JJ sir, going with the same flow, since you have allowed your slide to be almost read, and I would also volunteer and say कि just नाम बोल दो sir and आगे बढ़ते हैं. Everybody knows everybody, you're all colleagues and friends.
True.
पूरा पढ़ते मत बैठो सर, कोई पढ़ने वाली बात नहीं है.
Technical glitch है. एक मिनट रुक जाइए. हाँ, I heard what you said, Amit. So I'm not going to read out the entire thing. So good morning. We are still actually 30 seconds ahead. So great. I would like to thank Dr. Nita Deshpande and the entire team IDEC 2021 for inviting me and my team, on whose behalf I am just opening the batting. And it's a very nice concept of having a evidence-based master class. We give talks, but we don't have to work this hard. So I think I'm sure my three colleagues have had to work hard, this being an EBM-based masterclass. The topic, as was introduced by Dr. Anjali, it is stage 1 to 3 diabetic kidney disease, epidemiology, assessment, and management. So before we go straight into the kidney, this is just to give you 2 slides about the holistic care of type 2 diabetes. Diabetes is not only sugar. Please manage blood pressure, please manage lipids, and please manage the other conditions that are associated with diabetes. There are acute and chronic complications. We are zooming in on nephropathy today, but please don't forget that diabetes is not only nephropathy. Diabetes is retinopathy, neuropathy, and the big chunk of cardiovascular disease, which you must have heard enough during this meeting. And also, when we talk about management, please don't think that doctors alone manage. Yes, we play a big role, but it is a holistic management. You need a dietitian, you need a trainer, motivator, etc. So who are my people who will be doing most of the batting? First and foremost, today is Teachers' Day. So as I said, we have already said to each other, Happy Teachers' Day, and I pronounce to all 3 of you because you're all 3 of your teachers. First of all, Dr. Benny Nagarod, he will be discussing the epidemiology of the problem. As Dr. Amit said, I won't be reading out everything. I think we all know her. We all know her achievements. I mean, she has written multiple chapters in diabetes textbooks. She's a founder member of Association of Diabetes Educators of India 2006, which tells you that she has been here, a veteran with full of knowledge. Next, we have Dr. Amit Sharaf. He's going to tell you how to screen for DKD. See, we all hear about nephropathy, but we forget about the basics. We have to go talk about basics, and then if you have any questions, we can go into more details with the question answer session. Dr. Amit Sharaf, while I was talking all this, you must have read through. He's director, Department of Medicine, Jupiter Hospital in Mumbai, National API governing body member, and what should I say, lead MRCP examiner. I'll read 3 for each, Amit, okay, because 3 of you are there. And the last, and not the least, who will be closing in is the debonair, Dr. Suresh Damodaran, and he's going to do the major part as to how to manage. I think many of you will be interested in how to manage. Don't forget, knowing the prevalence, knowing how to investigate is equally important as is management. And Suresh, I have to read 3 things. So he is consultant endocrinology from Coimbatore. He is a little bit of a executive council member, Endocrine Society of India, and vice president, Endocrine Society of Tamil Nadu. So with that, this will be our flow. I don't want you to read through it. We have 7 minutes of talk by each of our specialists. Scope of the problem, epidemiology, how to screen for it, and how to manage DKD. And then we have a full about 7 to 10 minutes for question answer session. So I'll invite you to ask us questions. With that, I'll stop sharing my screen and I will invite my first panelist, Dr. Benny Nagarod, to please start with the first topic, which is what is the scope of the problem. Over to you, Dr. Benny.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mukherjee. And first of all, let me thank Dr. Nita, Sanjay, Anjali, Archana, all the entire IDEC team. You have always been a benchmark actually for giving new and new methods of teaching people. So I really salute you as well on Teachers' Day. One sec. Sorry for this. So well, let us see the scope of the problem. We know that the prevalence of diabetes itself is going up in all the countries, more so in our Asian countries. And CKD actually remains an insufficiently addressed complication of type 2 diabetes. It is very hard to diagnose CKD clinically, so we have to resort to tests, and that makes it a big problem. And so there is a coincidence of CKD and type 2 diabetes. If there is a so, then they are at markedly increased risk of mortality. And if the GFR is less, it is a very strong predictor of major cardiovascular events in diabetes patients, despite their albumin being normal. And presence of chronic kidney disease is associated with nearly 1.5-fold greater risk of major vascular events. So this is the prevalence of chronic kidney disease. That's a global data. You will see the various colors which are highlighted. China has the maximum prevalence, 6 to 74. Next comes India, 25 to 54%, and then USA, 24 to 43%, and Europe and Africa coming behind this. It means that the prevalence of chronic kidney disease is rising. And the reason could be that type 2 diabetes itself is increasing, one, and basically the awareness of cardiovascular disease is much more in the population all over the world. And so we are seeing more and more of microvascular complication. This is the prevalence of CKD among US adults. This is the ENHANCE study. You will see that at all stages of chronic kidney disease, the prevalence is much higher in those who have diabetes. It is also much higher in people who are older, naturally, because they're having problems over the years of obesity, inflammation, and also diabetes, hypertension, etc. So naturally, the chronic kidney disease will be much higher in the older age group. And then you can see the various stages. The prevalence is around 5 to 15% at various stages of chronic kidney disease. This is the global burden of diabetic kidney disease. I'm sure you can't read all that small print over there, but clearly, the dark boxes show the prevalence in 1990 and the light boxes show the prevalence in 217. And you can see over 27 years, the prevalence of chronic kidney disease is surely rising much more in the men compared to the women in all the countries. This is the prevalence of diabetic kidney disease in India, a study done by A.K. Das and Dr. Kalra presented in JAPI in 2018. And they have taken more than 500 patients in the Indian OPDs in many centers in India, and they had found that at least 58.7% of patients with type 2 diabetes in Indian OPDs have high risk of chronic kidney disease, which is really alarming. That means more than half of patients have some form of diabetic kidney disease, and 1 out of every 2 is having it. So the more and more importance of screening and finding out whether they have these microvascular complications earlier. They have also stratified by risk. So a lower risk, as you can see the colors, lower risk is 41.3%, moderately increased risk is 36.7%, and high risk is 13.3%, and very high risk 8.7%. You will see these colors now here very beautifully. On the left-hand side, you will see the GFR and the various stages of the GFR. The GFR tells us actually how much of filtration occurs in the glomeruli. And on the right-hand side, right on top, you will see albuminuria. And albuminuria tells us that how much of leakage of albumin is there in the glomeruli. Both these components are necessary to stage CKD, and the GFR actually tells us how far from the edge of the cliff the patient is, the edge of the cliff being end-stage renal disease or dialysis. And albuminuria tells us how fast your train is moving towards the edge of the cliff being dialysis. And so you need both these components to diagnose CKD. So even if the GFR is normal, as you can see in the green color, but the patient has albuminuria, that patient is still at risk because the color green, which is normal, changes from yellow to dark yellow. On the other hand, if the patient has no albuminuria, but the GFR is low, say grade 4, this patient is also at severe high risk because you can see the color there, dark yellow to red. So it is important to screen both this at the very onset to find out and to prevent actually albuminuria and decreasing GFR, since we have better drugs today. It's not only the end-stage renal disease, but it is a cardiovascular disease that increases mortality in most of our patients of chronic kidney disease. Renal and CVD are interconnected, like they are the two sides of the same coin. Acute or chronic disorder of one can induce a dysfunction in the other. And you will see on the right-hand side that in patients of chronic kidney disease, death is more likely to be due to cardiovascular disease than end-stage renal disease. Therefore, renal and cardiac systems and outcomes should be considered as a continuum together. Here you can see CKD and the CV outcomes. They are closely linked, and you will see that picture on the right-hand side, the colors on the x-axis going from green to yellow to orange to red, showing a declining GFR. And on the y-axis is the hazard ratio of cardiovascular mortality. You will see that as the patient goes from green towards the red, a declining GFR, the hazard ratio of cardiovascular mortality goes up. And somewhere around a GFR of 60 and below, the hazard ratio of mortality is significantly higher and it becomes steeper. You'll wonder what the colors of red, green, and blue are. They are suggesting albuminuria. So even if the patient is somewhere around the green and he has albuminuria, you see he will be in the red. So the hazard ratio increases. And both these, as I told you earlier, are important. Therefore, timely diagnosis and treatment of diabetic kidney disease is important to reduce the risk of CV events. Again, showing that the whole metabolic syndrome is connected with the complications. They are like the ribbons or the plait made intertwined amongst themselves, which basically is an end result of endothelial dysfunctions. Many components are part of it. You will see inflammation, obesity, type 2 diabetes, hypertension, dyslipidemia, all components of the metabolic syndrome. And all these contribute to various complications, including heart disease, CKD, and leading to cardiovascular death. So this is my last slide. So when we see patients early in the course of type 2 diabetes, we need to connect the dots that it's not only the glycemia that we treat, we also need to look at heart disease and also diagnose kidney disease much earlier in the course, because we have good treatments now to prevent the progression of chronic kidney disease. So thank you very much. I think I'm on time. I was given 7 minutes.
Perfect. You've been perfectly on time. Thank you for sharing the epidemiology, letting us know that there's a rising trend in DKD. So I will have 2 quick questions. So let me have the first question with you, Dr. Benny. See, you showed that the prevalence of DKD is rising in India. What are the various reasons you can think of as to why the prevalence is gradually rising?
So there are various reasons. First of all, the prevalence of type 2 diabetes is increasing in India. And as I showed you in my slide, the Asian community has a much higher prevalence of type 2 diabetes compared to the Western counterparts. Actually, India has more insulin resistance. We are thin fat Indians. Our lifestyles have become more sedentary compared to the Western world. And if you see the urban and rural prevalence, it is not only rising in the urban areas, but also rising in the rural areas, which means those who are actually moving, physical activity was actually a much higher part of rural areas is also becoming sedentary. And that is also the obesity is increasing, the metabolic syndrome is increasing, and type 2 diabetes is increasing, and that's why the prevalence of DKD is increasing. Cardiovascular disease, patients are more aware and therefore they rush to the hospital pretty early, but these microvascular complications are not screened very effectively earlier, and so the incidence is rising in India.
That brings to my next question, exactly your last line, and I think I'll throw it at Dr. Suresh Damodaran from Coimbatore. Suresh, do you think we are missing detecting DKD in our day-to-day clinical practice? Because you see, when the eye care study is being done, a very small study of 500 patients, but these are in tertiary level OPDs. And there you find a whopping 58% prevalence of DKD. So, but this is not the true picture, you see, when you go to the villages, smaller towns. So do you think we are missing out? And if you are missing out, what should we do to prevent this missing out of DKD?
Well, I think thanks for the opportunity, number one. And Dr. Benny has given an overall view, which is very, very good about the epidemiology. But the main point is, as you mentioned, JJ, the incidence is increasing, but we are not detecting. The simple reason is that I think in most of the clinics, we do creatinine and we don't check more than that. And then creatinine, even eGFR is not available in few centers, especially what you're mentioning in the rural areas. So that is a big challenge, even getting that, forget about getting a urine albumin creatinine ratio or anything. So probably these are the things that we should focus. And now a point of care testing is available, and probably the focus should be even in the tertiary centers to do more of urine albumin creatinine ratios very early stage, at least a urine dipstick in the rural areas to start with, and the creatinine and the eGFR to start with, and then go for albumin creatinine ratio. This is the only way to find out. Other than that, I think you can mark them as a high risk with blood pressure, diabetes, previous, quite a lot of other factors. You can go ahead and do it and mark it and screen it that way. But yeah, this is the only way. We have to work hard to get there.
So I agree with you. I think we need to screen more in the cities. I think it's very easy. We tend to forget that, and also we tend to forget the work pressure. You see, many of our colleagues are seeing huge number of patients. So even if a creatinine is done, they may not have the time. We say just use your app and calculate, but they may not have the time to calculate that. So fair enough. So Dr. Negru, thank you very much. Thank you very much. So now we know that DKD is an issue. And DKD is not an issue just because of the renal part, but as Dr. Negru very nicely showed, the risk of mortality due to cardiovascular disease is immensely increased in people with diabetic kidney disease. So knowing the epidemiology, we now need to know, as Dr. Suresh was mentioning, we're not screening enough, but we need to know how to screen, right? I mean, there are various ways for screening for DKD. If you read textbooks, you have so much information. What we need is a simple, easy to do things in our busy clinics. And for that, we have Dr. Amit Sharaf. So Amit, can you take us through in the next 7 minutes how to screen for DKD? Over to you.
Thank you, JJ, for setting the tone of the context of my talk. Dr. Benny Madam did a wonderful job of showing the prevalence and the incidence of the entire thing. My job is to take it forward, and as Suresh also said, to do the screening bit of it. As I start from the beginning of my slideshow, I want to thank the entire IDEC team. So jumping straight into the topic, see, mostly diabetic kidney disease, most of us are clinicians for years now, and we've seen patients over the years. Remember these two words, it's a presumptive diagnosis. It's a presumptive if you see a persistent albuminuria or a persistently decreased GFR. It's a presumptive, diagnosis. If there is a long duration of diabetes, somebody's been with you for 20, 25, 30 odd years, or there is an established diabetic retinopathy, you presume that the kidneys are involved, unless a judgment of an alternative etiology, which is unlikely as diabetes is put forth. So this is how you begin the topic by saying that you take for granted in a way that diabetic kidney disease either today or in the time to come will be seen. This is just in brief the stages of chronic kidney disease. We're aware of these. Stage 1, GFR of more than equal to 90 ml per minute per 1.3 square meters. Stage 2, 60 to 89. Stage 3, 30 to 59. Stage 4, 15 to 29. And stage 5 kidney disease is defined as a GFR of less than 15 ml per minute per 1.37 meter square. So what are the percentages? Because what's happening is a lot of people who have normoalbuminuric condition come to us with maybe renal involvement. So I tried to pull out some reference for this. There was a study in the BMC nephrology which proved that almost 30 to 35% of people who do not have albuminuria as a sign of renal insufficiency with adult onset diabetes. So this limits the role of microalbuminuria as a screening tool. And this is pretty important because as Suresh and everybody, as we put our heads together on this topic, we will be talking about the ratios, the albuminuria, the creatinine. So what exactly should a clinician of today be doing? So this is one slide just limiting the role of albuminuria. We are aware of these two equations. So one is the modification of diet in renal disease MDRD study equation, and the other is the chronic kidney disease epidemiology correlation equation. Both are most widely used in the traceable equations for creatinine, but both are creatinine based. It's a very complex formula. It's available as an app or on the internet. If you just put in these equations and you put in the patient's values, then you get a straight answer of the GFR. But the problem is, when should you not be using, as Benny madam and even Suresh pointed out, that creatinine is just, I mean, as clinicians with a busy practice, do a serum creat, it's normal, go away. You don't have a kidney disease is mostly the thing we all end up doing. But individuals with an unstable creatinine concentration, such as pregnant women, patients with serious comorbid conditions, hospitalized individuals because of fluid changes, particularly those with acute renal failure, these are the places where a creatinine-based equations may not really give you an accurate answer. Similarly, what about those persons with having extremes of muscle mass and extremes of dietetics? Today, we've seen people adhere to all kind of crash diets, people who have, into bodybuilding, who take a lot of supplementation, protein intake. So not only these, we have amputees, we have paraplegics, bodybuilders, as I mentioned, rather morbidly obese individuals, patients who have muscle wasting disorders or neuromuscular disorders, those suffering from malnutrition, eating purely a vegan diet or a low meat diet. And as I said, taking creatine as a dietary supplement are all these individuals where a creat based estimation may not be very accurate. So just to take it forward, the limitation then of the CKD EPI and the MDRD equations remain because the estimates remain imprecise in these chunk of population. There are physiological limitations, as I said, pregnancy and extremes of weight in terms of age, sex and gender and race. Both equations capture only some of the non-GFR determinants of creatinine concentrations. All the populations are not well represented. You have racial and ethnic minorities other than blacks. If you see the formulas, we had a specificity there for black individuals. You put in this value, but not all the races and not all the ethnic backgrounds are covered. And imprecision at a very low creatinine concentration. So that will indirectly give a higher eGFR, has not been carefully studied, but has likely contributed to the variability in higher eGFR values. So that brings us to then how frequently. We've established that to an extent we need to screen. So how do we screen and how frequently do we screen? So take, for example, a type 2 diabetic. So once he comes to you and you've diagnosed a type 1, then 5 years after diagnosis is the time where you should be screening for a DKD and therefore forwards. Type 2 diabetes, testing for kidney disease is recommended, undertaken at time of diagnosis. Today he comes to you, today you test for sugars and for kidney function test, and then annually is what is required. In patients with the evidence of kidney disease, already an established kidney disease, the presence of proliferative diabetic retinopathy correlates with the pathological features of diabetic kidney disease, even if the duration of diabetes is short. So that third point goes a little against the duration of diabetes. Somebody may have diabetes for 3 years, but if there is proliferative retinopathy, then you think of the DKD already established. So a presumptive clinical diagnosis should not be, this is one of my last slides now. So when should you not be considering a diabetic kidney disease? So if somebody has a severe albuminuria, more than 300 milligrams per day of protein loss within 5 years of onset of either type 1 or many years prior to the onset of type 2, we should not be considering an established diabetic kidney disease. If the patient has RBC cast, dysmorphic RBCs, WBC cast, I think it's self-explanatory that look at other causes of glomerulonephritis and not really diabetic kidney disease. Presence of other systemic disease that is commonly associated with diabetes, most common thing which comes to mind is hypertension. Don't think of diabetic kidney disease as the first cause for his kidney disorder. And a sudden increase in albuminuria or a rapid decline in eGFR. These are scenarios where we should strongly suspect a non-diabetic etiology. Lastly, as everybody would want to know, when do we refer to a nephrologist? So these are bullet points. There are going to be variability in each case here, but Broadly, if a eGFR is less than 30 ml per minute per 1.73 meters square, you should refer to a nephrologist. Broadly, an acute decrease in eGFR, that is more than 25% decrease from the baseline acute period of time. Refractory hypertension, a serum potassium either more than equal to 5.5 or less than equal to 3.5 milliequivalents per liter. And lastly, a renal anemia, hemoglobin of less than equal to 10.5 grams per deciliter in a patient with CKD, and optimal iron availability are the scenarios where we should be referring to nephrologist. With that, I end my short talk. It is a pleasure to talk to you all, and JJ, back to you for question and discussion, please.
Amit, it was short but very sweet, and you rightly covered most of the points regarding how to screen creatinine, urine ACR, and how to calculate the eGFR. See, the thing which intrigued me was 1/3 you said do not have microalbuminuria. It's creatinine based, but see, most of us do not have facilities to measure GFR. You see, we have to rely on the various equations, and the two we use is MDRD and CKD EPI. We know the limitations. You have listed the limitations. So just can you tell us 3 points where we should not be using the equation, where we will go wrong? Just 1, 2, 3. You have already said it in your talk, but for a busy clinician, when we are sitting in our clinic, well, most of the time I use that formula you see when I'm in my clinic. So when I should not, you have already said it. So just 2, 3 points where we should not.
Fair enough. So just 3 bullet points. Let's categorize them as physiological 1 point, pathological 2 points. Physiological, a pregnant lady, surely there are a lot of fluctuations. Somebody somebody on a crash diet. He's a normal individual. Somebody who's a bodybuilder who's on a crash diet. Please don't refrain from using. Pathologically, those with any kind of muscular disorder. So whether it's a paraplegic or a hemiplegic, neuromuscular junction disorders in which the muscle mass is contributing, and therefore your creat based assays will not be very accurate. And lastly, situations where people are on supplementation. A lot of people today take in protein and creatinine supplements. So these are scenarios where you need to be on your guard. You rather look into the other scenarios and then diagnose a diabetic kidney disease.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That's clear. And my next question goes to Dr. Benny.
Yes.
See, we from younger days, we were taught that if there's retinopathy, there has to be nephropathy. Now, how true is it? I mean, is it that every time I have retinopathy, I will have nephropathy, and the other side of the coin, if I don't have retinopathy, I won't have nephropathy? So this is a clinical teaching we have all taught. So how true is this statement? Either way.
Yes, you're perfectly right, JJ, that, even I, in the past, believed that, when you want to diagnose a DKD, you always look at the eyes and see if retinopathy is there. But data has shown that this may not be true. If you take a type 1 diabetic patients, it's a pure sugar disease, and they have more of glomerulopathy compared to tubular interstitial disease. They have more of microalbuminuria, and in them, 95 to 98% of type 1 diabetes do have retinopathy associated with DKD. But type 2 patients are different. Type 2 patients is the kidney disease is more heterogeneous. They have other components like ischemic nephropathy. They have more tubular interstitial disease. They have hypertensive kidney disease associated, all parts of the metabolic syndrome. And because it is more heterogeneous, data has shown that 1/3 of type 2 diabetic patients may not have retinopathy. So this is, I think, news for us. And it was news to me too, because you gave us, I also looked up this and I found this, and I hope this answers your question.
Thank you very much. 2 very important points about not all have microalbuminuria, not all have retinopathy. That was what Amit has got on the table. We'll have discussions later on after the next presentation by Dr. Suresh Damodaran. We now know that epidemiology is increasing, high prevalence in Indians. We now know how to screen. Actually, it's not a very difficult disease to screen. You see, you don't need a cath lab, you don't need a nuclear medicine, instruments, etc., to diagnose DKD. Very simple. And once you find DKD, we need to manage. And most of us are clinicians, I hope, who are joining this masterclass. So Suresh, over the next, you have 1 minute extra. We give you 8 minutes to tell us how to, not assessment, go straight to management. Over to you.
Thank you, JJ. Okay, so I think the epidemiology and also investigation has been really, you got the basic of it, and you know how to assess now. So what are the doubts? Hopefully that's all been cleared with the previous both speakers very well. Now, the management aspect, we all know it's a huge challenge, and it's the area that has not been well, I would say, there's not much of drugs that has been there for almost 20 years or so, apart from ACE and ARBs, and now SGLT2. But apart from that, I think in 20 years or so, that area is very, I would say that not much of work done or the drugs available for the management. Now, with that, I think we know UKPDS data that early uncontrolled glycemia is a real thing that will lead to microvascular disease. And if you have an intensive glycemic control, then the microvascular disease risk comes down significantly. So this has been there for almost 20 years or so. But after that, I think it's been in Diabetes Care 2019 has published to show from mean A1C level and then microvascular disease according to that. So the increase in risk more with more of A1C. So this is the intensive glycemic control studies so far done. UKPDS, Accord, Advance, and VADT. VADT, we know that's a veteran trial, and UKPDS has been there for a very long time. That's done in Oxford. So that is the one trial that showed some benefit in macrovascular as well. But I think we'll talk about microvascular disease because the kidneys comes in microvascular disease. So if you do an intensive glycemic control, there is no question there is a huge benefit in terms of microvascular disease for eyes and kidneys and other small blood vessels. So and that is proved very well in Accord and VADT. That is that if you leave it later and then try to do an intensive glycemic control, you may not have the benefit that if you start it from early age. But yeah, other thing is the multifactorial intervention. So I mentioned about the glycemia, but the Steno-2 has shown that if you do manage all the other risk factors, for example, smoking, body weight, hypertension, if you do all the things together, and you will have a benefit in kidney. So I come across with number one with glycemia, and then number two with multifactorial intervention. So what is the data for other drugs to be beneficial in renal impairment? For example, the renal IDNT, these are all ARBs and ACE are the ones that has been studied almost like for past 20 years, as I mentioned. These are the drugs that has been well studied. Even candesartan has got good studies, irbesartan, losartan, and even calcium channel blockers. Even all the diabetic drugs will come up with some microvascular reduction. I'll come to that in a minute with SGLT2. So you can see from the renal data with losartan and IDNT with irbesartan, there is a significant benefit in doubling of creatinine rate is less, and progressing to end-stage renal disease is less, and death and CV mortality is also comes down. So we know ARBs are useful. So that is the third point. Now coming to the main thing, which is the heart drug, if you like, with the data pouring in with heart failure, renal failure, you name it, everything has got sleep apnea, you name it, a lot of data are coming out with SGLT2. Now, SGLT2 inhibition consistently improves the kidney outcomes. I was mentioning almost for 20 years, the only drugs for renal outcomes available was ACE and ARBs. Now, we got from Canvas and Credence, which has got primary renal outcome data is available with canagliflozin, and DAPA has got a dedicated trial with DAPA-CKD, and even Declare TIMI, EMPA-REG reduced all these trials. Along with all these RCTs, next one is the real world data. Even the real world studies also showed huge benefit. If you look at the graph, this all in this side showing it's a huge benefit favoring SGLT2 inhibition while you do control. So if you are an SGLT2, there is a high chance of not only controlling the glycemia, but the primary renal outcomes are much better with SGLT2 inhibition. So what I've done so far is, again, just to summarize, with glycemia intensive, And second thing is the multifactorial intervention. And third one is the intensive glycemic control. And then the fourth one is the SGLT2 inhibition as a drug. And then I've showed you data about ACE and ARBs. So this is the KDIGO data. If I want you to take one or two slides, this one and the next slide, if you can take it out of this talk, that'll be very useful for you for practice. Diabetes and kidney should be treated with comprehensive strategy. Some patients you can do antiplatelet, but SGLT2 and RAS blockade should be must. And all the patients should have glycemia, multifactorial control of lipid, nutrition, exercise, and smoking cessation should happen. Again, this slide is beautifully described by KDIGO, nutrition, weight loss, and then interestingly, the metformin. I think we should all get some message to start metformin. There are people just even a mild amount of creatine goes off, they stop the metformin, but that shouldn't be the case. You can use until the eGFR almost like 45 or 40, something like that. So this is the guidelines, and then eGFR of less than 30, and you should not be using SGLT2. And then there's good data with GLP-1, with liraglutide and dulaglutide, with leader and other studies also. Now even semaglutide has got some data. Now, so these are the drugs that should be focused and used renal impairment. So ongoing type 1 nephropathy on dialysis, as I mentioned, these are the things: ACE inhibitors, nutrition, statin, and diabetic control. What are the other emerging options? Aldosterone antagonists like spironolactone, which is called a RALS trial for heart failure, and pentoxifylline, and then activated vitamin D. And sevelamer is an increased inflammation and oxidative stress. It's almost like a AGE, advanced glycated end products. It deals with it is like a phosphate binder, deals with that. So I stop there. I think my 7 minutes and 20 seconds is done. So just to summarize, the multifactorial intervention, glycemic control, and the ACE and ARBs along with the SGLT2 inhibitors should be considered in the management of diabetic kidney disease. I'm happy to take any questions. JJ.
They're, I think, bowled over, Suresh.
Huh?
Yes, we are all bowled over. It was a very nice master class.
But why didn't you, Dr. Damodaran, this is Dr. Meena Chhabra from Delhi. Shouldn't we discuss management of anemia in diabetic kidney disease, management of hyperparathyroidism, all those issues?
I'm sure. But I think this is a master class that should reach all the people. So the multifactorial management at least should be dealt with in the first place. And then the phobia of not having metformin and other things just for the intensive glycemic control. And your point is well made regarding anemia and everything. But that should normally done by a nephrologist, if you like, that can be taken over by them. So we should have a referral system just to deal with that. Hyperpara and other things should be dealt with nephrologists. That is the way the tertiary referral center works. But I think for the rural areas and everything, I think I'm sure this is the way that you can manage. But I'm sure in tertiary referral centers and places where you can't.
3A is when CKD 3A or B is when you should refer to nephrologist. There should be a clear message that this is the time when we should bring in the nephrologist. So you think CKD 3?
Well, CKD 3 even earlier than that, because you don't know whether we are missing out other diseases in kidney disease. So we should be alert. But the primary point is we should be screening everyone, and we should be addressing all the multiple risk factors. And that is the message that we are giving here. Not when to refer, but if you want that message, then it should be somewhere between stage 2 and stage 3 rather than stage 1, because we can just monitor at that stage with an endo or diabetologist.
Sorry, I got disconnected for a while.
Yeah,
so
please do take
I missed your last 2 slides, Suresh, but I've seen those slides.
Neeta's,
I know. So
Neeta's
I just need to. Okay, so I need 2 questions to ask. So Suresh, I think your talk, you mentioned it, but I want a simple prescription. I am seeing a type 2 diabetic patient. eGFR is 45. There is macroalbuminuria. He's hypertensive. Tell me 1, 2, 3 drugs, not glycemic management. What drugs should I use to protect the kidney?
Well, I think the first one is obviously we discussed about the diet modification and other things apart from that, exercise and other things. The first drug should be ACE or ARBs, and that is the first line of management. And from glycemia point of view, you can go for a gliptin.
No, not glycemia, kidney protection.
The kidney protection, then SGLT2s have got a huge benefit in primary renal outcomes as well. So that should be the other drugs that should be considered. And you can go for calcium channel blockers and other things based on your hypertension. And as Meena was mentioning, you can address other things like hyperpara and anemia and stuff.
Okay,
But
we won't go into
these
that.
should be the first line. Yeah, that is what I said.
That's for
But
the
yeah, the
specialist.
message.
That's for the specialist. That's where they refer to the nephrologist. And
No, that is where. That's
Amit,
point
the
I-
next question is to you. I mean, as Suresh rightly mentioned, the SGLT2 inhibitors are the wonder kids in managing type 2 diabetes, and a huge data with regards to diabetic kidney disease. Two things which we'd like to know from you is when not to use an SGLT2 inhibitor, because I think SGLT2 inhibitors always ruled in somebody with type 2 diabetes and DKD. If you're not using it, the reason is probably cost or non-availability, etc. But in your mind, SGLT2 inhibitor and an ACE-ARB has to be there when you see somebody type 2 diabetes and DKD. So when should I not use SGLT2 inhibitor? And the second question is, patient is already on an SGLT2 inhibitor, and when should I stop it? These two aspects.
Wonderful, JJ. So I think two scenarios, clear and a simple answer. Scenario number one, patient coming to me with diabetes, not on SGLT2. If he has all the signs of heading to a kidney disease, in the sense his uncontrolled hypertensive, he is a borderline creat, he is not very compliant, his routine is such, not very great in his food habitus, his follow-ups are pretty much all over the place. Over the period of time, creatinine and eGFR are really a little downhill. I would rather not give it. So judge your patient well, see its scenario well. If he fits into that category, do not. Other, as Suresh rightly said in one of his slides, anything which comes to an eGFR of close to 30 ml and lesser, I think if he's on a SGLT2, you rather take it off. So till that point, whatever benefit we saw from these trials, which he rightly, RCTs which Suresh showed, are the benefits. But as you see a decline in the kidney function for whatever else you're doing, and if the kidney function are progressively decline and reaching 30 and lesser, you rather take them off. So two case scenarios.
Thank you, Amit. I think I'm looking at the chat box for the last 5 minutes. It still stays
No,
empty.
what
Yeah,
about
no.
recurrent urinary tract infection, Dr. JJ? If my type 2 diabetic patient is getting UTIs
Okay,
because
fair
he
enough.
has
So
CKD.
there's a standard list, Meena, for when not to use an SGLT2
No.
inhibitor. We were focusing primarily on DKD, so we were more focused on eGFR less than 30. But certainly, if somebody is having recurrent UTI, now the problem is the definition of recurrent UTI. Nobody yet knows what is the definition of recurrent UTI. But the closest you can come is from the DECLARE-TIMI trial, where they tried to define recurrent UTI, and they said 2 episodes in a year. Now, if somebody has an upper UTI, like suppose they have pyelonephritis or pyonephrosis, would 1 episode be enough to scare you off, or would you rather have 2 episodes to scare you off? I would chicken out. For me, 1 episode is good enough to stop an SGLT2 inhibitor. Third issue is recurrent GTI. Now, again, inverted commas, what is recurrent? I mean, I have colleagues who will use it even after 6 episodes of GTI, and I have colleagues who will stop after 1 episode of GTI. So I will tell you what, no textbook will give you this, no guideline gives you this. So what I would suggest is, I mean, what I practice is, if you have 3 minor episodes of GTI, or if you have 1 real major episode of GTI, I would rather stop SGLT2 inhibitor. This is open to question. I think we have a lot of teachers and specialists here. So Meena, you have a go ahead first. What is your practice?
So I'll tell you one thing that I only see for 2 minor GTIs, because I see more women coming back to me. So my take is, I see more GTI than maybe anybody who's a male endocrinologist.
To the point answer. This is EBM. So
To
you'll
the
have
point
to-
answer is, after 2 episodes, I will never give the. And one more question is lower urinary tract symptoms. Say somebody has a benign prostatic hypertrophy, has an autonomic bladder, an unstable bladder. Would you give SGLT2 in spite of having chronic kidney disease?
I think this is Suresh's question. Suresh, you were talking about treatment, so yeah.
No. I was just saying that I'd stop with even one episode because the next episode, patient won't come to you. So I think just forget about the patient. I think they won't come to you. You wait for another episode. So that is my practice anyway. So I don't know where the second episode or third episode comes in. But I think the point about prostatomegaly and everything is there are a lot of men, if you do an ultrasound, will have fatty liver and a prostatomegaly. That is not a contraindication to go ahead and stop it. But if they have symptoms, you can detail history, will give the history that will help you to make the decision. But it's worth trying in these people. It's not, there is no harm in not trying.
Okay. So
I had a question actually.
Okay, go ahead.
What is the role of finerenone now in renoprotection?
Just out hot from the press.
Yes.
Suresh.
Meena can answer. Meena?
No, I'm not taking this. I just heard it yesterday from the horse's mouth yesterday in the IDEC conference, and I don't think.
Nita,
But
you can educate
Nita
us.
will
Being a
answer.
teacher's
I
day.
heard it yesterday.
You are
No.
being the teachers for
No,
almost like
I
10
have
people.
just come. Yeah, I have
Thousands.
also just read up about it. But do
So
you see it
let's
coming
answer
up?
this. Let's answer this question next IDEC. 1 year of data.
Yeah, but it seems to be having
It's
a lot
hot
of
off
role
the
in-
press, not
Yes.
available to us. So good that you brought it up. So I think we have only another 30 seconds. So it gives me the
No,
my
we
pleasure
can
to...
take 1 or 2 more minutes because we have a buffer of 5 minutes. So that's okay. If someone
okay. In
else
that
has-
case, before I summarize and thank everybody, we can have some more questions.
So Dr.
So
JJ,
who-
my
we don't have
question
anybody to-
still remains that why will we not treat anemia and refer to the nephrologist? Because we'll have to decide if it's iron deficiency, we do the iron studies, or is it erythropoietin? I mean, what stops us
Suresh,
from?
Well, I think I'm sorry that if diabetes is a field which will encroach a lot of specialities. So if we are, it is not a matter of knowledge gaining or you've done internal medicine or anything, you would have extensive experience over handling it. It is not the point of knowledge gaining and this thing. There are certain areas they would be much better in handling the specialty. For example, if we know in and about SGLT2 than somebody who hasn't got an experience. And that is my point. I think the patient care will be much better and they will know the variety, they know the biosimilars, they know the cheaper rate. I don't know, they would have experienced multiple aplasias or something in their own experience. So people would be talking about, I don't know, hyperparathyroidism with cardiovascular disease. They will have much more data than us. So I would, this is my practice to refer to even some minor thing to cardiology to do a stress and echo and we can
Yeah, okay.
encroach
Dr.
others.
JJ, we didn't discuss protein restriction, whether vegetarians in diabetic kidney disease proteins should be restricted, or we end up causing so much cachexia, sarcopenia. So one line to our listeners about protein intake in patients who've developed diabetic nephropathy.
I think Suresh is not very keen to take that question. So Meena, can you let us know about the protein intake? It's a controversial area, debatable area.
No, I
It
think
is not
what-
debatable. There are, I suppose, JJ,
Clear
enough evidence
guidelines.
in relation to 0.7 to 0.8 gram per
No,
kg
Yes,
body weight.
absolutely.
That everybody knows. I don't know
This
what
is the
Meena has
practice
up her sleeve, you
everybody-
see.
No, what
No,
I would
but
say is that if pure vegetarians are there and they are not taking any extra protein from
No
anywhere,
need to.
and there is no need to restrict the dals and the pulses, because even with the dals and the pulses, they are not going to reach
Achieve.
0. They are not going to achieve or cross that limit of 0.7
Yes. yeah.
grams per kg body weight. So it's a myth that you should restrict proteins in pure vegetarians. Yes.
Yeah.
Nita, standard, we know that 0.7 to 0.8 grams, and then somebody has to sit with the patient and see how much they are taking.
Yes, yes.
That is true. I agree with that.
Yeah.
But most of the times we would not have to restrict, is my
Correct.
take
Meena,
on
coming
that.
to your previous question, managing anemia, giving erythropoietin, etc., depends on where you are working, you see. If you have the
Okay.
luxury of having a nephrologist next door, then I would suggest please refer to a nephrologist for the 5 points which Amit presented in his talk. If there's a rapid deterioration in EGFR, sudden massive albuminuria, if there are casts in the urine, then certainly you should refer to a nephrologist. If you are in a say secondary care setting, If you are in a village setting, then certainly, I mean, anemia, all of us manage. Come on, we give the iron
Yeah,
tablets,
so
etc.
why Dr. Damodharan,
Coming to
you don't want to manage anemia?
coming to erythropoietin, I think that is a specialist field. I mean, I for one do not prescribe erythropoietin. I don't know. We have 5-6 of us in the panel. Any of us uses erythropoietin on his or own?
No.
Generally,
use.
no.
I use.
It won't, the controversy won't end. I mean,
Okay.
you see, this is, we should
Yeah.
educate the people according to what we would like to practice, ideal scenario, and then according to their own scenario, they can change the practice.
So, Linta, I will summarize over the next 2 minutes. Then I think we have taken your 5 minutes extra. So first of all,
Yeah, if you can summarize that, that should be fine.
another just 30 seconds, I'll summarize. First of all, thank you, Neeta. Thank you, IDEC, for giving us this opportunity. Second, thank you, Dr. Benny, Dr.
I'm
Amit,
doing
and Dr.
nothing.
Suresh for supporting me so nicely in sharing this DKD EBM. I will just summarize 2 points of each of your talk. Dr. Benny, you very nicely suggested that DKD's prevalence is rising, and very nicely suggested that we are not screening enough. Screening is simple. We don't need heavy instruments to screen for DKD. It's just the serum creatinine from a reliable lab and an ACR. Amit, thank you very much again for suggesting that using the estimated GFR is the best we can do in our busy clinical practices, and highlighting that we should be using CKD EPI in our clinic, and also highlighting that not all DKDs will have albuminuria and not all DKDs will have retinopathy. And Suresh, thank you. Yours was the vastest of all the topics, managing type DKD in type 2 diabetics. But I think you very nicely mentioned the take-home points. Meena very nicely highlighted the diet part, and you very nicely highlighted the ACE, ARB, and the SGLT2. As I said, we should have reasons for not using SGLT2 inhibitor in type 2 diabetes and DKD. With that,
Can I thank JJ for organizing this? I think we have to give a big applause to him, and I think he's been.
JJ was the best moderator over the years.
No, it's not for moderating. It is just the way he organized for past 2 weeks in the WhatsApp group and everything. So that made it a really well organized thing. So I think he was just behind us for slides, and he began for everything. So I think it's
Big
done
round
very
of applause
well.
to
So
JJ.
Thank you very much, and I thank these masters on Teachers Day. So it's so we have had wonderful teachers for this DKD session. Thank you all very much. Please do stay logged in for the next EBM master